episode of the First Responder Playbook. It is my pleasure to welcome my guest, Justin Bocock, who began his career in law enforcement as a uniformed division officer in the U.S. Secret Service before joining the Mesa, Arizona Police Department, where he served 20 years in roles including patrol officer, training officer, detective, and homicide investigator. During his career, he investigated hundreds of violent crimes, suspicious deaths, and homicides. In 2019, he was named Homicide Detective of the Year by the Arizona Homicide Investigators Association for pioneering drone technology as a Part 107 pilot myself. I love that. In crime scene investigations, he retired from the Mesa Police Department in 2021 and later contributed as a subject matter expert for criminal justice textbooks used in higher education. September 2025, Justin's debut book, On Call, Case Files from a Career in Homicide, was published by Genius Book Publishing. Justin, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brent. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, uh, we'll definitely circle around back to the drone stuff because I love that's a good topic I love to talk about. So tell me, how did you get into law enforcement, and how did you choose the Secret Service originally?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I just happened into it. So when I graduated high school at 18, I joined the Air Force. Actually went in when I was 19. And I worked I was an aircraft mechanic at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey. And I worked on large cargo airplanes called C-141B Starlifters. And part of our mission is we transported the limousines and vehicles for presidential movements. So after I was getting close to getting out, I did 4 years in the Air Force, and I didn't really have a job yet. And one day, we were transporting some limos for a presidential detail for President Clinton back then. And the Secret Service guys are like, "Hey, what are you doing when you get out? There's a thing called the uniform division. You don't have to have a degree." And they really look for people who have military experience and also some sort of other experience, like aircraft mechanic. So I applied, and it took about 3 years to get the job, like the background investigation and all of that. I got out of the Air Force, actually moved to Seattle, where I worked on civilian airplanes there. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from the Secret Service, and they said, um, "You've been accepted. The academy starts in 2 weeks. We need a yes or no right now, because if you say no, we're going to next on list." So I said yes, and that's how I started law enforcement. So it just kind of happened.
That's very cool. How long did you do in the Secret Service?
Not long. It was about a year and a half, just shy of 2 years. I did all the training. Training was amazing. Went down to you start your training in Beltsville, Maryland, in the actual Secret Service Academy for a week. Then you go down to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, FLETC, in Glencoe, Georgia, where we did 20 weeks of federal officer training. Then you go back to Beltsville, Maryland, for more Secret Service specific training. After I graduated from the academy, I was assigned to the Naval Observatory, the official residence of the Vice President, where at that time it was Al Gore. And great training, but the job was really boring. As uniform division, our job was basically we were going to we secure the property and the agents secure the person. So I was in motorcades. So we would drive somewhere and then I would sit in a car. And I'm a very high strung person, don't do sitting well. And this is all pre 9/11. This was 1990. This was 1999 to 2000. I left in February of 2001. And it was a very boring job for me at that time. I was mid 20s, hair on fire, wanted to do a million things, and that was just not it. So in February, oh,
I
you
was
had a
gonna
question?
say, I could see where that would wear on somebody that's new into the career pretty quickly. Like this is not what I envisioned. So how did you decide Mesa Police Department in Arizona?
And again, just fell into it. So I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona, which is about 2 hours south of Mesa. But one day I had a friend who was when I was in the Secret Service in DC. I was on post at the Naval Observatory, and I got a phone call from a friend who was at the White House who said, "Hey, have you ever heard of Mesa, Arizona?" Knowing that I'm from Arizona. And I said, "It's a small town north of Tucson." He goes, "Well, there's a cop out here. They're hiring, and they're doing a whole bunch of hiring. There's a whole. I guess they're really building up on technology, and they're kind of a growing police department." So I said, "You know what? I'll give it a shot." So I actually flew out and took the test en route to the Democrat National Convention in 2000 because it was in Los Angeles at the Staples Center, and I was doing Secret Service details there. So I took some time en route. I tested, and in February they called and they offered me a job, and I took it. Um, Again, Secret Service, great training, best training in the world. They trained us in any scenario you could possibly imagine. Super duper boring. And I think I was looking for that excitement of the street cop excitement, which when we get there, my first day on the job in Mesa was more exciting than most of my time in the Secret Service. But again, that was pre 9/11. All my friends that were in for 9/11, it changed immediately after that. So I left kind of prematurely, you could say, but I think I made the right choice.
Yeah. So, how long was the Mesa Academy, and was it like a live-in academy? Was it go home at night? How'd they handle their academy?
Yeah, the Mesa Academy, it was a go home at night. It was not a live in academy, and it was 20 weeks. It was 20 weeks, and it was very much like the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. A lot of the training was very much the same because we were basically the FLETC or Federal Law Enforcement Training Center teaches you how to be a federal cop. It was pretty much the same thing. You get pepper sprayed, you have domestic violence scenarios, you have scenarios where you have to identify threat, all that. It was very, very similar. But Mesa really focused a lot. And what I really liked, and I in the beginning was they really focused a lot on integrity. They had this thing where they had a vending machines on the academy grounds, and you'd get hungry all the time, right? Because you're in training. And if you would put change in the machine, or you would buy something from the machine, and more change came out than you were expected to get, if you didn't turn that in, they would terminate you. They were real big on that. They're real big on integrity, and so was the Secret Service. But they didn't test you like this all the time. And there were someone in my academy actually just took a quarter out of the machine, and they're like, "Hey, did you take the quarter?" He didn't lie. I said, "Yeah, I did." Like, okay, well, grab your books and you're gone. It was a very different, and they were a small town back then, kind of. I mean, Mesa back then was about in 2001 was about 400,000. They're now at about 600, 700,000. They've grown a lot. But it was still a good sized department to go into. And I really liked the way that they were teaching. They really preached integrity. They really preached good investigative and good police tactics and work. Like, don't jump the gun, think before you act, that kind of thing. I thought it was very good training.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it already, but let's hear about your first day. You said it's more
Okay,
exciting than your Secret Service career.
I graduated from the Mesa Police Department Academy, and then we go into field training, where it's another 6 weeks or so, where you're with another officer and you go through different phases. My first day, so I pretty much worked most of my patrol time. I did end up doing 6 years in patrol. I did it all in the downtown area of Mesa, which was kind of the not the bad part of town, but the more high crime part of town. And in my very first day, I was working with an officer, and we had the gang area. Day one, I pulled my gun 2 times, which is more times than I'd ever pulled my gun in the Secret Service. Not in training. In training, we did it all the time. But yeah, my first day is like my second call for service. We show up, and there's a guy running down an alley with a gun in his hand. Somebody's yelling, "He's got a gun!" And my FTO looks at me and says, "What do we do?" And we pull a gun out and we run. And I'm like, "Wow, I'm a street cop." This is kind of what I did. And I really enjoyed the excitement of it. I really enjoyed the
And you
excitement
were
of that.
bit by the bug.
Yes, yes.
I laugh at that because I think we all have that one moment where we're like, all right, this is fun. We're staying.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think every cop has that moment. So, how long did you end up doing in patrol before you go to investigations? And do you have like a favorite assignment during patrol, or a favorite story of yours during your patrol time?
So I did, so to start in the beginning, I did 6 years in patrol total. And the last three and a half of that, 4 years, I was a field training officer. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed being a field training officer. That was a lot of fun. Just kind of seeing, it was great to see getting a new recruit because we had 4 phases. So I would get a new recruit in first phase for a couple weeks, then like that was right out of the academy, and then I would have them again at the end. And it was really cool to see them fresh out of the academy, and then 8 weeks later in the last phase where they've grown to be a real police officer, and I'm seeing them how they kind of grew and how they've changed so much. Um, as for a So I did patrol, and then to get to your investigations, I tested into detectives in 2007. And that's because I really started getting into doing investigations and kind of wanted to further my investigative skills and go to detecting. One of my favorite patrol stories was just luck. I've always been, knock on wood, I've always been kind of lucky. And also to go along with what we were kind of talking about, I think that most police officers look for, and I always use this example with my recruits too. Do as you're trained. Training and policy are for a reason. Simple call. I'm drinking a soda, minding my business. I get a call for service in my beat. Hey, this guy, he has some property. He goes out. There's a homeless guy sleeping behind his shed. Show up. The guy is very cool. He's like, yeah, I got a lot of property. I found this homeless guy behind my shed. I really don't want to press charges. I just don't want him there. Like, all right. It's a fully enclosed yard. It's got a lock. It's got a gate. So in Arizona, that is technically a crime. That's trespassing. So it's a misdemeanor, but it's technically a crime. But the guy didn't want to press charges. He was like, I just want him gone. So I contact the guy, the homeless person, and like, hey, you need to leave. Okay. By the way, can I see some ID? I don't have ID. What's your name? He gives me his name, his date of birth. I run it. Of course, it comes back as nothing. I'm like, okay, what's your name, man? I gotta have a name. He doesn't want to press charges, but I gotta know who you are. Okay, I lied. Here's my real name and my real date of birth. Comes back as absolutely nothing. I'm like, oh right, man. Like this is so I go and I talk to the guy, I basically tell him, look, he's not giving me his name. He will leave. He's not giving me his name. And he's like, you know what? I'll press charges. Like, okay, so a simple misdemeanor, press charges. I do all this, get him down to jail. He gets a different name. So I'm like, nope, that's it. We're doing the fingerprint thing. So long story short, I end up kind of holding him because in Mesa, the policy was just to basically you give him a ticket and send him on his way. It's a very mild offense. Trespassing is a very mild offense. And but I hold them. I call a fingerprint tech. They come down. Everybody's kind of annoyed. They're like, well, I mean, I'm like, he's not telling me his name for a reason. You know what I mean? Well, long story short, that's because he had a warrant for 2 sexual assaults in Yuma, Arizona, which is about 2 hours towards California from us, and that's why he was lying about his name. He wasn't any of those names. So I finally get his fingerprints back. Then all the sex crimes detectives are coming down. They're like, hey, he's got a warrant for his arrest. They end up taking his DNA, and they ended up linking him to 2 sexual assaults in Mesa. So I
Wow.
always use that as an example of most cops, and this was 3 or 4 hours out of your day, and every cop knows like that's just a lot of paperwork. I just want to be done with my shift. I want to go have lunch with my friends. You know what I mean? Like this, rules are for a reason. You know what I mean? When someone just a lot of people would like write a ticket, and I've done it. I've admitted I'm no better. There's times where I've been in a hurry and I'd be like, okay, what's your name? And it comes back, okay, here's your ticket. Show up to court, knowing okay, they probably lied to me, but for whatever reason, and I always say go through the books or go through the policy, go through the training, follow the rules for a reason because that worked out and we got a genuinely bad guy off the street. I don't ever know what happened to him, but I'm sure he had 4 sexual assaults he was looking at. I'm sure he's in prison for a while.
That's good old fashioned police work.
Yes.
And a lot of times, obviously in a court of criminal law, your gut feeling obviously can't stand up, but something piqued your interest of like, hey, I probably shouldn't cut this guy loose until I find out who he is. And you followed policy and procedure to a T, and you caught a bad guy, a good bad guy, and sent him away, to handle his charges that he's got pending, and some ones that hadn't been solved yet either. So that's
Yes. Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So you go to investigations. Where did you go originally? Investigation, was it just like general crimes, burglaries? How did you guys have that broke up?
So we were a small, so like I said, we were kind of a growing department and we didn't have nighttime detectives for a long time. Well, when I applied to detectives, that's when they were growing. We had a brand new chief, and he was growing it. He was growing our department because basically like you got to have 24-hour detectives. So when I got on, I was one of the nighttime detectives. And I was actually the only nighttime detective for Central, like the Central area for a while there. And I started out I always joke, I was the beer run detective. Everybody starts out in beer runs. So I would get beer runs, I'd look at video, and then I'd put photo lineups together, and I'd go out to the beer people or the vendors and say, hey, do you recognize anybody in the photo lineup? If they pick somebody, I go knock on their door, say, hey, you're on video. They said you stole a beer, and 90% of the time they're like, yeah, because it's like this is like 2-3 weeks ago. Yeah, yeah, I walked out with a case of beer 2 weeks ago. Okay, here's your ticket. Go to court. Have a great day. That's where you start out at. And then one night I was the only detective on duty. We had a shooting, and they're, hey, we need a detective. Any detectives on duty? And I was like, oh, David 206. That's me. I'm on duty. And I was in the violent crime world, and then I was and I found that doing lineups in beer runs is just like doing lineups for a shooting. And I'm running with it, and I'm doing it, and I'm like, wow, I really like kind of the violent crime world of detecting. Again, the violent crime bug. So that's kind of how that happened.
Well, and you kind of touched on it in that a lot of people, and especially a lot of cops, are probably like, "Oh, I don't want to mess with those beer runs. It's a minor thing." But bad criminals commit those minor offenses all the
Yeah.
time too, as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how you start growing as an officer. Is like, hey, I'm going to start identifying these people, and then you can say, hey, look, I've worked a case, and then you start building up and adding to your toolbox as an officer is invaluable for when something big like that does happen. You're like, okay, I can do this. And
Absolutely.
it takes a little extra effort, and I try to stress that to new guys all the time. It's a lot easier to put in the extra effort than you know how a lot of cops would rather do more work to get out of work, and I laugh at that. So tell me, how did you get into homicide investigations? And you did that for a long time. What really stood out to you that made you stay in that unit?
So I did the beer run thing, and then I kind of moved up to robbery. One of our robbery detectives, I started working with him a whole lot, and then he had a heart attack. So then they were like, "Hey, Justin, we need you. Can you step up for him?" So I kind of stepped up in that capacity, and then again, I fell in love with robbery. Um, had no real intentions of going to homicide. So I went to detective world in 2007. By 2012, I was happy. I was in serial robberies. I was handling all the serial robberies in the entire city. So and back then we had a lot of OxyContin robberies and things like that. So we get some serious groups of guys who are serious robbers. It was fun trying to figure out who they were and all that. And then I was on call, and that's actually the first chapter in the book. That's my first homicide. I got a call for a guy that got into basically he was pushed off of a parking garage. Um, and get there, the guy is still conscious. He identifies he tells us who did it. He's like, hey, this is the guy. I know him. This is the guy who pushed me off the bridge, off the 2-story parking garage. He ended up falling, hitting his head, going to the hospital. So we're about 6 hours into the investigation, do photo lineups, identify suspect, working the crime scene, trying to collecting evidence for DNA. We use backpacks, and there's a bunch of blood and other broken eyeglasses from the victim, all kinds of things like this. I get a call from the hospital. Hey, your guy just died. And I was like, oh, well. So now it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm calling homicide. The homicide sergeant knows me. He had seen me kind of work before. And he was like, you know what, Justin, run with it. And we'll see you at 6 in the morning. So I just kept going with it. So I had our violent offender guys. I kind of told them I didn't tell them that he was deceased because I didn't want them freaking out. Because some cops when they hear homicide they think okay we could do anything and everything and oh my god it's a homicide, an aggravated assault. It's just like a homicide. Just find the guy. So I just basically had these guys had our undercover. Well, we call them street crimes. Some people call them anti-crimes, but it's the plain clothes detectives. I basically said, there's probable cause to arrest this guy. Go find him. So it's like 6:30 in the morning. The homicide unit comes in. They're drinking their coffee. They say, "Hey, come to our office and brief us." In the middle of the briefing, I get a call from my guys, my street crime guys, basically, and they said, "Yeah, we found him. He's in handcuffs. Where do you want him?" And I'm like, "Well, good job because he's wanted for homicide. Take him to this." So I basically, so then I hung with the homicide detective for the whole day, helping him with the interviews because he was doing the interview. They basically took the case over. They were doing the interviews, but he's kind of coming to me saying, "Hey, is that what really happened?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what happened. That sounds good." Um, I did the autopsy, all that, and that's when I realized. And also, the senior homicide guy was kind of like, "Do you want to come to homicide?" I'm like, "I don't know if I'm ready. Don't know if I have the experience." And he was like, you just did one. Like, you just did it. The homicide is an aggravated assault without a victim. So he's like, I think you're ready. So I tested for the next cycle, which was it was literally a couple months down the road. I tested for it and I ended up getting accepted in September of 2012. And then I went to homicide and stayed there till the end of my career for about 8 years.
That's awesome. Um, I want to talk about like bias and investigations, and I think that's kind of a perfect segue into that. And like in any investigation, but especially in like a homicide investigation, you can't come into an investigation with a bias. You have to keep that open mind. Can you talk about some ways to like combat that, and like how younger officers that may not be familiar with that can watch out for that?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is you just have to be self-reflective. We as police officers, you have to remember that, we're going to have an opinion. You see somebody and like, oh, I know he's up to no good. Okay, you can say that all you want, but you don't know that. You think that you may have a hunch of that. Like we were talking about the gut feeling and the
Yep,
hunch and all that other kind of stuff. You may have a hunch, but sometimes your hunches are wrong or you just can't prove it. And I think
very
that's
true.
one of the biggest things is to stick. I don't want to say stick to the facts, but stick to the facts. Stick to the facts and the training. And homicide is one of the rare cases because in like the drug world, they'll arrest somebody on drugs and you'll have multiple charges. So you'll have 30 counts of possession of drugs or possession of drugs and then possession of the scale and the pipes and for sales and then the money. And you can have, you have a whole list of charges. In a lot of homicide cases, all you have is homicide. There's first degree homicide, second degree homicide. So it's not one of those situations where you give him 50 charges and then they drop 30 of them and he takes a plea to two. Sometimes you're going to court with one case or with one charge, and that is murder. And that's all on you to prove. You, as the case agent, you sit on that stand and you look at the jury and you got to convince them of that one charge. So I always say you have to be, and I don't know why, but because it's just, I guess it's just the way that it is. But in the cops all know this is that, if you have a DUI, it's not as hard as a murder sometimes, even though it's the exact same, a crime's a crime. If it meets the statute, if it meets the elements of the crime, it meets the elements of the crime. But there's a stigma to a homicide where people are like, oh, you have to have more than probable cause. You have to have more evidence, and I have fingerprints, not enough. We need more. We need more. We need more. So you're constantly looking for all the evidence that you can. And that's where you have to really not let bias get in there. Because a lot of times I would see where we would have a murder and it would just happen and we start doing a briefing and everybody throws in there, oh, I know this guy Charlie in the neighborhood, he's good for it. Okay, this is the TV. All right, we're not going to go find Charlie because he's good for it. Let's focus on the facts and the evidence. And the great thing about modern day is we have DNA, cell phones, fingerprints. We have so much evidence where it's not the 1800s anymore, where you just go interview somebody and did you do it? Yep, I did. And that's your evidence. So we have a lot more that we can work on. And a lot of times it's not always the detective too, it's also staff and society and the media. A murder happens or a violent crime happens, everybody wants an answer immediately. So we automatically go to okay, well, who's going to be, all right, there's a robbery crew in the area. They're probably the ones that did this. Maybe not. Maybe not. I've had situations where circumstantially we could probably have gone to court and proved murder on an individual. And then we got evidence at the last minute. It was a year and a half later. We got crucial evidence back. Wasn't him. Completely different random guy. It was a complete random act of violence that we never even considered. And that's why you really have to use that as an example and always tell yourself as a cop, yeah, I mean, don't let people go, but at the same time, think, spidey senses are going off. I feel like this guy might be involved in this. I can't prove it now, but don't never, not think of other alternatives because there's always other alternatives and it may be somebody else. It may not, but it may be. And you really have to be cognizant of that. And that's the biggest thing. It can't be learned. It has to be learned through failure or learned through examples like me. Look at my failures and my examples of my bias and when I have done things like that. And then it's something that you have to just be self-reflective on. And if you are finding yourself saying, nope, it's that person, no matter what, stop, be logical, and say, okay, Only facts and evidence are going to lead me to that person, not my feelings.
Love it. My first time testifying at anywhere, prelim, jury trial, anything, was at a first degree murder trial at jury trial. I was the initial officer on a first degree murder, and I just kind of held the scene because we were a smaller agency, but they didn't call me for prelim or anything like that. And so my first time ever testifying was literally at jury trial of a first degree, a homicide case. And I laughed because I got in there and I was nervous, and I looked at the jury and I was like, "Oh, that's the jury," and it kind of calmed me down. And I'll never forget the defense attorney was a well-known like local attorney, big shot attorney, and he stood up and popped his suspenders like you'd see on the TVs from like the 60s or 70s, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And then I got through it, and I was like, "Well, if I can do it on a first degree murder trial, I can testify at anything. I'm good to
Exactly.
go."
Yeah. Yes.
And it didn't scare me away. I'm still here 10 years later. But so I want to talk about um, as a 107 pilot myself, um, because we really have. I mean, there are agencies that use it in Oklahoma for that purpose, but we're still more search and rescue, SWAT situations. I want to talk about how you piloted y'all's program to start using it for evidence, scene reconstruction, stuff like that. Um, I want to talk about that because I think that's awesome.
Okay. So we started out with, so I really enjoyed part of the investigative world. I really enjoyed doing crime scene investigations. And part of that was doing crime scene diagrams. And I was always the techie guy in my unit. We were a 9-person homicide unit, and I was the tech guy where we started out making hand-drawn diagrams of interior crime scenes. And then I found software. We actually started using software to make 3D rendering of homes. Um, and then we started having some outdoor scenes. And I was doing some 3D renders, but we had a couple of officer involved shootings where there were multiple officers on the outside in different locations, and there was very large crime scenes. And I was doing 3D renderings, and they were okay, but they weren't really accurately representing it. Like I could do a 3D rendering of a house and really accurately represent where that evidence was to a jury and to command staff and to attorneys, where they would look at it and go, okay, now I understand. We were having a hard time with that on outdoor crime scenes. So a couple of times we actually used the helicopter to fly over, and we were taking pictures with our department had a helicopter. We were doing that. That's expensive, and the helicopter's not always there. And then we do it, and then I'd say, you know what? It'd be nice if we could like move and pan around and maybe do some panoramics, make it cinematic. And then that's when drones were just coming out. And I'm like, you know what? Let's do this drone thing. So there's about two of us in our unit, and then there's another detective in the vehicle crimes unit who pushed our chief because they really wanted it for all their outdoor vehicle collisions. We didn't handle vehicle fatalities. That was a whole nother, that was the vehicular crime section. So we pitched it to our chief, and they gave us a couple $100,000. I said, yeah, make it happen and see what happens. So we did it, and that was 2019. And in society at that time, police agencies just saw a lot of officer involved shootings. I don't know why. I think it was the political or whatever it was. But we had a lot of shootings that year, and that helped us out because every one of those shootings, we were able to get the drones. And so what we did is we would use the drones to obviously take an overhead view of an outdoor officer involved shooting type area. But then we were also using the drones to, if there was a foot pursuit, we would run the drone at the eye level of the officer, like 6 feet off the ground. You can put that into like we were using the Mavic Mini. You could put that in there and we could move it at that altitude where now we're almost getting like a walkthrough. So you can watch the officer's body camera, and then you can see the 4K DJI or the 4K drone footage of that. And it kind of gives a better idea of all the people who have to make decisions who weren't there. Because, we're doing all the investigation 2 o'clock in the morning, and then command staff comes in and they got to start making decisions. And now they can see the videos themselves because they're not going to go out there and do the investigation. They want us to brief them. So before we had PowerPoints and pictures, and now we can show them videos and overheads. And, this is the area. And they're like, oh, wow. So it really started helping them out in that. And then it branched into the county attorneys started wanting it. And then we became part 107 as well. And I still hold my 107. So we were like, if we're going to do this, we got to do it legit because we have airports in our area. We can't just be flying drones. You know what I mean? And so like we kind of convinced them like, hey, you got to put us through the little course, get us licensed, and we got to do this legit. And then we did 4 or 5 officer involved shootings. We did 2 or 3 homicides. Then other agencies, Scottsdale, started calling us out. They said, hey, we had a vehicle came in an officer and he had to use lethal force. Can you come out and do some drone work? Because the county attorney says they want you to do the drone work for the trial. Like, yeah, absolutely. So then as it started getting up, then everybody else started kind of putting in and saying, hey, we need to get this going. We need to get this going. So just
And
kind
you won
of,
an
again,
award over that, right?
yes. So I was a member of the Arizona Homicide Investigators Association. And in 2019, I got Investigator of the Year for that. Because we started it in Mesa and then it kind of spread from there and everybody liked it.
I would say it's a pretty cool award to have.
Yes, yeah, that was definitely one of the high points in my career because it was all my peers.
So yeah, absolutely. And there's so many things. I'm a very big proponent now of the DFR programs that agencies are pushing out to, where they'll have them at fixed points and
Yes.
put them in the air for when something big pops off, because a lot of times they can be officers there, and
Mhm.
you have the eyes in the sky, and especially at bigger agencies, like Mesa or Phoenix or something like that. I mean, those type of things where you got somebody monitoring them probably are
Yes.
probably pretty invaluable. And
Now
so
they
I,
have.
I
I mean, I've been retired for 4 years, but I still have friends on, and now they do. They have like 2 or 3 fixed. They have a 24-hour crime area or 24-hour crime center. So they have a robbery happen, and they literally are launching drones and just following the vehicle until it stops, videotaping them, and then just arresting them. Like
that's
like I
awesome.
said, there's so much technology out there. It's hard to get away from crime. It's hard to get away with crime anymore. But yeah, drones are a huge part of technology of policing now.
That's awesome. So let's talk about your book.
Okay.
On Call. Tell us how you went about writing your book, and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, so I retired after 20 years in 2021, and then I was in retirement for about 2 weeks, and then I got a call from a friend who said, "Hey, they're looking for a subject matter expert for the new criminal justice textbooks. There's 2 criminal textbooks that were coming out in that year, and they wanted a subject matter expert writer. Would you be interested?" Sure. Working from home, it's right after COVID, all that. So yeah, so that really piqued my interest because I started basically it was a lot of Zoom meetings. We'd all get together in groups and we'd come together with these. And I was kind of the street level of it. There was a lot of PhDs in criminal justice, and I have a bachelor's degree, but these are all doctors and PhDs of criminology, but have never actually pointed a gun at anybody or put handcuffs on anybody. So they're coming up with scenarios like, oh, this would be a good scenario for a Terry stop. And I would be like, well, but then that never happens. Like this is the normal Terry stop. You're driving down a neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning and you see 2 people shake hands real quick and then go separate ways. And that's more of a. So I got into that world. I did that for a while until the books got done, and then I started thinking, there's so many books out there that are written by um, um, prosecutors and commanders and people who led investigation. There's not a lot of books that are written by actual detectives. And I noticed that there's not a disconnect, but there's just 2 different methods of learning because you got to learn the book way, but there's also the on the job training and like the real world experience of it. And I noticed that when we were doing our brainstorming for the textbook, that I was kind of that voice because everybody else had a PhD. I was just the street cop dash detective that was in the group. So, and I'd always been interested in writing a book because we would do things that, like 2 o'clock in the morning, you're sitting in a bloody crime scene, and it's kind of you're tired. It's kind of a horrible situation, but you always think there's so many people out there that this is going to be like the most interesting job ever. And also, how many people get to do what we do? It really is kind of interesting and kind of fun. So I sat down and just started thinking, like, let me see what I could do. So I came up with I wrote the first draft. Um, and I started kind of selling it out, and I got some feedback, and I ended up using a professional editor to help me because I'm not an author by any means. I'm a cop. I'm a detective report writer. I've written hundreds of thousands of reports, but they're like, dude, great stories, but it's written like a cop. you got to loosen it up a little bit. So I did a whole rewrite. It took about 3 years because I did a complete rewrite on the final version. Um, and then I ended up pitching it, and then Genius Book Publishing came along. They do a lot of true crime stuff, and they were like, "Yeah, we like it because it's like a manual for detectives that didn't have it because there is no official training for like homicide detecting or even like like even like robbery detecting, like not like a homicide school you go to. They have homicide schools, but it's usually just different techniques. But there's not any like specific training just for that position. So what I did is I highlighted, it's 11 chapters, and I highlighted 13 cases that I worked, either as case agent or I was intimately involved in, where I learned a valuable lesson on. And I talk about dying declarations and how dying declarations can be used, and sometimes they can't be used. I also go through like photo lineups, um, physical characteristics orders, search warrants, all these things. And it's not just for police officers, it's for the true crime enthusiasts as well. Because my wife loves those law enforcement shows. But you always watch them, and in 15 minutes, they like, oh, a murder happens. And we went to Jim's house and arrested him. And you're like, whoa, you missed something in the middle there. And I kind of wanted to show the true crime readers how a real investigation unfolds. So I call it on call because as police officers, and as a homicide detective, you're on call. We were on call like every third week, which means for 24 hours a day, you get a phone call, no matter what time of day it is, and you got an hour to be on scene in tie, in shirt, on scene. I run the reader through the on call. So what I'm told on the phone when I'm woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning, what we learn in the briefing, and then we go through the cases, how I learned about the cases. So not necessarily the way that they're like the most logical way, but where we're given information and we're like, oh, we're going to run with it and go this way. And then we learn more information like, oh, that was all erroneous. We got to go this way. So I highlight a lot of successes. I also highlight some failures that I had because for the true crime detect or for the true crime enthusiast, it kind of shows them how the real world works. For fellow cops, detectives, we all learn by the stories from our elders. Like the senior detectives would sit down and we'd be joking and they would tell me about their stories and you would learn from that. Like, oh, I remember when Bob had this murder and he did this. Well, this is just a force multiplier because I'm not in a lot of other agencies. I'm in Mesa. Well, now somebody else in another agency that may not get a lot of murders can read my experiences, my successes, and my failures, and kind of go along with it and say, oh, hey, you know what? This guy did this, he tried this, and it actually worked. And as I'm writing it, I'm also focusing on the the limiting of the bias. I try to get 3 things in there: the education, the bias, and the emotion. I run the cases from start to finish, all the way until prosecution and adjudication. These are all adjudicated cases. They've all gone through the appellate process. Also, all the names and dates and all that have been kind of changed. So people who've worked the cases have read it and go, oh, I didn't know that was that case. So it's not hurting any cases, but we're trying to teach as best we can. I'm trying to teach, and I go through times where I did jump to conclusions, and it helped, but it was obviously not the right thing to do. But like you look at it and go, yeah, you kind of jumped to conclusions. It worked out for you this time. But then the next chapter, you see how you jump to conclusions, and yeah, that didn't work out well for you at all. You should have stuck to what you were talking about originally, and really just focusing on just the bare bones of investigations, of sticking to the facts and the basics. And good police work will lead you to the result all the time. Not picking a person and saying, how do I prove that person did it? No, no, no. Let the evidence direct you to where you're going to go. And so, yeah, so I kind of go through theirs. And then one of the chapters, 1 year, I actually got 3 self-defense homicides back to back. And I thought something was wrong with me because I'm like, am I leading these people down the wrong path or what? So I also talk about that in there as well. I go through self-defense. And the last thing that I did, which was part of the editing process, I have call outs throughout the book. So it's almost like a textbook where you'll have on the sides of the pages, like what a physical characteristic, also like what robbery is, what a burglary is. Everybody says, if you come home from work and your door's kicked in, everybody goes, I got robbed. No, you got burgled. You got burglary. So I explained the difference of those. We talk about felony murder, all this. So even the police officer, just a true crime enthusiast, can look at this and go, oh, that's what burglary is. That's what robbery is. That's what aggravated robbery is versus armed robbery. So we talk about a lot of that. And also in the cops, it's not going to teach you any of that stuff, but it will show you some examples again of how I solved some crimes and kind of went outside of the box and used some different techniques and different ideas. And hopefully someone will read that and go, hey, let me give that a shot in my case.
That's awesome. I love it. If somebody wants to reach out to you and like maybe book you for speaking or just reach out to you for like training stuff, and where can they get your book? How do they get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me at my website. It's www.justinbocock.com, my name. You can find the book on Amazon. You have to do On Call and then Justin Bocock. It's Bocock. You can also go to geniusbookpublishing.com, and the book is also on there. There's also links for all of that on my website. Again, www.justinbocock.com. I also have a Substack under Justin On Call, where you can I do little monthly or weekly things. I just put one out on victims, where I talk about how it's the holiday season, so I always think about the victims when I'm sitting with my family and thinking about all the victims that aren't there. And I kind of write a little essay about how sometimes we forget about the victims. We focus on the suspects, even as cops, right? When you were preparing for your testimony in your case, you were focusing on the testimony for what's going to help the case and not necessarily, who the victim was or were they, what were their friends like, what their families are. And just kind of something to remind us that, always keep the victims in our thoughts and our prayers, because, they're the whole reason that we're here. That's why we do what we do.
Wholeheartedly agree. Um, I've been wrapping up my episodes lately with a new thing, and I'll ask you the same thing in that if today's your last day on this earth, what's something that would either make the profession better or the world a better place?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. I think so. Making the profession better is it's what don't listen to society, don't listen to the media. Do your job, do your training. We are highly, highly trained. Listen to your training, and you know what to do. You know what to do, but follow your training and don't listen to everybody else. I think that's what makes policing well. Anybody can say whatever they want. Police officers, no matter where you are highly, highly trained, competent individuals. Trust yourself. Trust yourself, and it's hard. I know it's hard on the back end, but trust yourself. I think that's what I would have to offer for my profession. And as for making the world better, there's so much, but I just wish we'd be nicer to each other. You know what I mean? Like maybe just listen to each other. Maybe everybody do twice as much listening as they do talking. Maybe that'd be my advice to the world.
I wholeheartedly agree there. Wholeheartedly. Justin, thank you for joining me tonight. Guys, check out his book, check out his website, and you are always welcome back.
Thank you, Brent. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to come back.
Have a good night.
All right, you too, sir.